Good morning everyone, and welcome to our backyard. Today's video, I'd like to take you around the garden to show you what is doing well under our conditions of very high heat and very high humidity. A lot of folks have had extreme heat this summer, and we have had heat not too bad, but it's been kind of bad lately. It's in the 100 teens with the heat index because it's so humid, and we have excessive heat warnings today, tomorrow, I think for the next couple of days, but then we'll get down to the mid 90s. If you hear power tools in the background, I apologize. I have neighbors that are apparently doing some type of work early in the morning here. Fun. So my name is Crystal, and I garden in Zone 9 south of Houston. Fairly close, not super close, but not too far from the Texas Gulf Coast. And so we have very hot and humid weather, and one of the other conditions that we garden with is heavy clay soil. But we have had excessive heat warnings the last few days, and it's been tough on plants and animals. And so I wanted to go around the garden and just show you some of the things that aren't showing the stress. And so I'm over here in this little 4x4, and I have a volunteer Tithonia plant, which is blooming very beautifully. And I also have volunteer blue porterweed. And these have been wonderful. And look how high, they're almost as tall as I am. And they were volunteers from this spring. So I left them in because I was just curious what color the porterweed was going to be. And I've noticed, I think I've shared with you, that the blue porterweed is the one that I find that will come and sprout up in my yard. The other types don't. So this seed must spread way more easily than the other colors. Next to it, I have a red porterweed that flowered beautifully a little bit ago, and now it's doesn't have a lot of flowers, but this is very popular, the porterweed. And then right next to it, the Tithonia, it's very popular with the pollinators. Okay, the next thing I want to show you is over in the south area. And on the way there, I have my purple porterweed that is blooming very well, actually. It has a lot of blooms on it, and I'm really thankful for that because the pollinators are on this plant all day. Okay, back over in the back. So in the heat of summer like this, pentas do extremely well. They're very much a warm season plant. They do very well in the heat, and pollinators love pentas. This happens to be a pink penta. I've been looking for the heirloom variety. Most of the pentas that I have found are, well, all of them are hybrids, and so they don't grow very tall, and I am looking for the hybrid pentas. So if anybody knows anywhere that you can purchase in Texas the heirloom pentas, I'm very much interested. But pentas do so well in our heat and humidity. And then I want to show you the glorious firebush. Oh, I am so thankful this time of year for firebush because it blooms and berries, produces the berries and blooms, and it is just such a staple for hummingbirds and pollinators and butterflies alike, and it's just teeming with life all day long. And I have 3 firebush back here. And as you can see, they're not quite, they're almost as tall as my fence. I'm gonna go on the other side. Firebush or Hamelia patens is native to Florida. It does extremely well here in Texas, and it has the perfect flower for a hummingbird. As you can see, it's a tubular shaped flower, and then when it's done flowering, it creates little berries, and the birds eat these berries. Hamelia patens or firebush does so well in the heat of the summer. In fact, almost it seems like the hotter it is, the better it does. Just so thankful to have it in the back garden here. Another plant that does so well in our heat and humidity is lantana. And this lantana, as you can see, had so many blooms on it just a few days ago. And I've also noticed that I'm getting some nibbles on it. So I've got something that's eating on the lantana. Lantana is super for pollinators. The butterflies in particular just love lantana. And lantana will flush out, take a few days break, flush out again, and so I don't have tons of flowers on it at the moment, but there's such a pollinator hit, and lantana does so well in this heat and humidity. If you do try lantana, I have mentioned that I really appreciate the Bloomify series, and that's because it's a mounding lantana that's sterile. Some complaints gardeners will have against lantana is it, what I call sprawls. It just grows horizontally, and they don't like that particular habit. Mounding lantana just does literally grow in a mound shape, and it's not necessarily compact because it does grow high. It needs full sun. You know, this lantana is easily probably 3.5 feet high, so it's not super compact, but it just performs beautifully in our heat and humidity. I absolutely need to include our vines. I have vines here in full sun. These are passion vines, and they are just gorgeous, stunning in this heat and humidity. They do bloom a really pretty purple color. This one happens to be the hybrid incense, and it opens. You'll see these will open probably in a couple of hours. They'll be really nice and open, but they flower during the summer, and it also produces fruit. The squirrels eat the fruit. But oh, here's another one. Looks like it's going to be opening so soon, but it's just lush and it's thick, and I really like how passion vine grows on our 5-panel trellis. It really thrives in this heat. The next one I want to point to is the one right down below, and this is Flamacanthus. This is a shrub that's native to Texas, and it's loved by so many different types of pollinators that I really probably will have Flamacanthus excuse me, in the yard continually because of how this performs. You can cut it back if you don't like how it's growing. What I do is I will stake it up because I don't like necessarily how it flops, because it doesn't have necessarily a tidy habit. but I love what it attracts. And I love if you, give it water, it will produce a flush of flowers consistently and continually. This doesn't show as well on camera, but this dwarf porterweed has been a very prolific grower all summer long and flowerer, and it is the hit in this center garden bed, which is my newest garden bed, and pollinators are on this all day long. And when I say it's a dwarf, it's certainly marketed as that. It was dwarf, it was little in the can. It stayed fairly tight and compact for quite a while, but it is the tallest. Bloom spikes are as tall as I am, so they are over 5 feet tall. And I did plant this one in the ground, and it absolutely loves its life here. This has been a huge hit, and I'm very thankful for it, because the pollinators are all over it all day long also. So I mentioned the passion vine that's over here. This is the cardinal climber vine, and it is just starting to have some nice blooms. There are a few, 20, 30, 40 a day. Let me come behind. And I love how this fills out and just becomes so lush. And it will start blooming pretty heavily here, which is wonderful because it usually is timed beautifully with the hummingbird migration that's going to start in a couple of weeks. It has a tubular shaped flower that's red, and hummingbirds are very much attracted to red. So we try to grow this every year, and it's usually just gorgeous like this. I do have to say, last year, Texas, especially around Houston, the greater metro Houston area, but all of Texas, we had excessive heat, excessive drought, and my cardinal climber did not perform well in those conditions. It still grew, but it didn't get lush like this, and it didn't bloom as profusely as it typically does. And so the way I see the growth here this year, even though we're getting a few days of this excessive heat warning, it's just not week after week. And this is gorgeous. As I have mentioned before, one of the things that does really well is tropical hibiscus. And this has been a very beautiful flowering plant for me. I have red and then yellow blooms and then pink blooms. And even though the pollinators don't necessarily gravitate towards this first, now that it's so hot, pollinators are on the hibiscus daily. So I've shared with you that I typically don't let my coleus flower until the end of August or September. And this year when we had Hurricane Beryl come through, it just changed the look of my shade garden, and it mowed the coleus down, and then the coleus started to flower, and I decided to let it flower. So I am doing something a little bit different, and I'm glad kind of now that I did, because the coleus is flowering in my shade garden and the pollinators are all over these. You wouldn't think that this tiny little flower would be such a draw, and it is. Even hummingbirds come to these tiny little flowers. I'm just so shocked all the time on how coleus draws in the pollinators. So I'm glad now that I did decide to let it go, and my coleus is flowering The chartreuse color, which is called River Walk, this is flowering earlier than most of my other coleus. But I do notice down here, Beale Street, which has a pretty little purple flower, is starting to flower. And then also El Brito is starting to flower. So I'm happy to see this just because it's been so hot. The weird year that we've had in the garden because of starting off in the beginning of July with that hurricane. And the plants are recovering and they've, are doing well mostly. Problem is in this time of year, it's really hard to find gorgeous flowering plants because they're pretty much tired and giving up by now. So when you have plants that do bring in the pollinators, such as coleus, it's really fun to have them going and producing. This is an inconspicuous type flower. This is called the blue butterfly clerodendron, and it also brings in tons of pollinators. It's not covered in blooms prolifically, but it has blooms all on its tips, and all throughout the day I will see all kinds of pollinators coming to this petite, unique and pretty flower. It does really well in the greater metro Houston heat and humidity. And of course I have to share that some of the salvia is doing very well. This happens to be Mystic Spires, and it is also visited continually by the pollinators. And I have an honorable mention here of my yellow Esperanza. This just does so well down here also. I need to find a place for it because I don't necessarily think that I have it showcased well in my container. I probably need to get this in the ground and where it shows off the flowers a little bit better. They get kind of washed out over here next to where we walk. But this is definitely welcome and needed for all the pollinators when it gets hot. Hot, hot, hot. What do they call it? The dog days of summer. So what flowers are doing really well for you in this heat of summer? Do you have some that are just standouts in your garden right now? If you do, comment. Because all of us really like to know what is growing very well in gardens at this time of year when it is hot, hot, hot August. So I thank you for joining me today. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you again soon.